After the smashing success of Donkey Kong Country, a sequel was inevitable, and less than a year later, just 364 days, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest was unleashed to the world. While the title was well received upon release, some actually find the first game to be preferable. After all, it's the only game in the original trilogy to feature a playable Donkey Kong. This gave the first title the distinct flavor of having a power character and an agile one. Additionally, the game is generally considered easier, making for a more friendly experience. It also sold significantly better, leaving a much larger nostalgia footprint. Others feel Diddy's Kong Quest improves upon the original with more visual variety, a better contrast between the playable characters, and a greater variety of set pieces, making the game more engaging to play. So, is DKC2 a superior sequel, or does the original still reign supreme? Let's dive in. Diddy's Kong Quest picks up right where the original left off. King K. Rool doesn't take kindly to being defeated after the events of the first game, so he kidnaps Donkey Kong, and it's up to Diddy and his girlfriend Dixie to rescue him. The events of the game then take place on K. Rool's turf, Crocodile Isle, which means there are all new themes and set pieces to explore and conquer. As a sequel to a game which had some seriously sublime controls, not much has really changed. The two apes control perfectly. Acceleration is quick and predictable. Jumping is responsive with a terrific jump arc and just enough hang time to feel fast and fluid rather than stiff and clumsy. And mid-air maneuverability remains excellent. As best as I can tell, Diddy Kong controls exactly the same as he did in his debut. His acceleration is quicker, especially while rolling, and he holds barrels directly in front of him. Newcomer Dixie Kong has slower acceleration, meaning more care must be taken when attacking enemies. She carries barrels above her head, and most importantly, she hovers with her helicopter hair. The decreased descent allows her to make drastically longer leaps, greatly aiding in enemy avoidance, and really changes up the platforming. At first glance, Dixie Kong might seem overpowered. However, I did find myself using Diddy Kong more than expected. I found the super fast acceleration make jumping over tall obstacles a lot easier. His roll jump is also significantly quicker, which I appreciated. And of course, holding a barrel or cannonball like a shield worked against enemies of all sizes. That isn't to say Dixie Kong is underpowered either. Her helicopter hair is as useful as one might imagine, just not always necessary. In this regard, DKC2 surpasses the original game by having a more distinct difference between the two playable characters, with each having pros and cons, and level gimmicks seeming to favor one character or the other, rewarding an easier experience when the proper Kong is selected. Even better, if a player manages to keep both Kongs alive, they can utilize a new throwing move. This can be used as a projectile attack to take down distant enemies or reach higher platforms. The upward throw is exceptionally useful, and once in the air, the thrown Kong can be gently guided left or right to land right where the player wants. As long as the thrown character isn't launched into a hazard, they can come right back like a boomerang as well, useful for grabbing items. While some may be disappointed in the lack of Donkey Kong being a playable character, I do find Rare did a wonderful job with the controls. They didn't change the core running and jumping, which were damn near perfect, but also added new wrinkles like throwing and hovering, giving DKC1 veterans something new to learn and master. Also unchanged is the game structure. DKC2 is a linear platformer, with just a single path from the shores of Crocodile Isle to the showdown against King K. Rool. Each area concludes with a boss fight, which will open up the path to the next set of levels. It's a simple formula, giving the designers more control over how a player will experience the adventure, with a single start point. Thankfully, as the game takes place on a whole new island, the set pieces are significantly different than the previous adventure. Diddy's Kong Quest opens in Gangplank Galleon, where the heroes battle the Kremlin crew aboard various pirate-themed ships. Crocodile Cauldron includes lava stages, overhauled mine levels, and a new twist on the underwater mechanic. Creme Quay introduces some new swamp set pieces, as well as the infamous brambles. Moving along, Crazy Kremland features amusement parks and beehives. Gloomy Gulch has ghost themes like a haunted forest and a library. Nearing the home stretch, K. Rool's Keep adds an ice level and some nifty castle stages. It's admirable how the designers were able to come up with new themes for each world without any feeling too similar, and it's also admirable they ignored the iconic daytime jungle theme and instead focused on creating an all-new adventure for returning players. What does make a return are the animal buddies. Rambi the rhino returns, allowing the player to smash through walls and bounce along spiked enemies. On Guard the swordfish makes underwater navigation easier with simple D-pad controls and an attack. The final returning buddy is Squawks the Parrot, though he is now a playable character with the ability to fly and launch eggs. All new for this adventure are Rattly the rattlesnake, who can jump exceptionally high and land on spiked enemies. Squitter the spider is perhaps the most unique of the bunch. He can shoot webs, which act as temporary platforms, and he has a second web shooter which can take out enemies. Rounding out the animal buddy package are Glimmer the anglerfish, who acts as a light in a single underwater level, and Clapper the seal. Clapper cools off water, either making boiling water safe for travel or freezing water to form a solid surface. Of course, like the Kongs, Rare didn't just stop at porting over the previous Animal Buddy moveset and calling it a day. Each of the rideable animals also has a charge attack of sorts. Rambi must use the charge attack to break through walls. On Guard's charge can be used to smash through crates, and the increased speed allows him to reach secret areas on retreating water. Lastly, Rattly can charge up for a super high jump. What I appreciate most is how these charge maneuvers are not pointless, but require to access bonus items if one is looking to complete the game. Like the throwing mechanic, the levels take advantage of the agility offered. It's also worth noting sometimes the player takes control of the animal buddy as a lone character, rather than an add-on. This also allowed some additional flexibility in the level design. In DKC1, the animal buddies were never required, meaning stages had to be designed with the limitations of the two Kongs in mind. This is not the case in DKC2. Many stages feature animal barrels which ditch the apes altogether, allowing the stages to take advantage of the animals' abilities without being handicapped by the limitations of the Kongs. It's another nice evolution to the groundwork paved by the original game. Animal barrels aren't the only new barrels though. Invincibility barrels give the player temporary invincibility. Crockhead barrels reveal temporary platforms needed to progress in the swamps. And plus and minus barrels add and subtract from a timer in certain levels. Speaking of barrels, there is generally less barrel navigation found in Diddy's Conquest. However, this is expanded upon as well. There are new barrels which can be freely rotated by the player and others on a timer, forcing quick thinking. There are also steerable barrels. The player can freely move about the stage. Again, the designers did a nice job taking a concept introduced in the original and greatly expanding upon it in the sequel. Also expanded on are the bosses. This was a real weak point of the first game, with all but one boss requiring the jumping attack to take down. This is rectified in Donkey Kong Country 2. Boss patterns are far more complex, requiring both pattern recognition and dexterity to defeat. Most require the use of projectile throwing as well, rather than simple jumping attacks, again requiring more skill from the player, forcing them to not only pick up an item, but also throwing the projectile with some proficiency. I also dig how after repeat attempts, players will learn patterns and can let the boss fly into them, quickening the process. Bosses are not repeated either, with the exception of Crow, with the second encounter being against the ghost of the defeated Crow, and King K. Rool, if one is going for a completionist run. Regular enemies also display a touch more competence. While most still follow a set pattern that will not be interrupted, I do appreciate how many won't begin jumping or shooting until the player is near. Others have invincibility periods where they cannot be attacked, again adding some variety and a little bit of strategy, something missing from the first game. Graphically, Donkey Kong Country 2 features the same pre-rendered style pioneered with the original, but massaged and improved. First, few things are ever pixelated to the point of being unrecognizable. It seems the artists were more aware of the resolution limitations of the Super Nintendo and tweaked their models accordingly. The result is more defined and recognizable objects and much better tiling with fewer seams. The 3D effects are also enhanced, especially in the water areas. I really dig how there appears to be 3D floors in the background of the ship, allowing the player to see the top and bottom of the layer as they move up and down the stage. This effect is also found on the water itself, allowing the player to see the surface of the water when above or below. Speaking of little touches, Donkey Kong Country 2 is chock full of them. In Gangplank Galley, the sun slowly sets as the player nears the end of the level. In fact, I didn't even notice this happening until I was skimming recorded footage. The sun literally gets lower in the background and the color palette changes accordingly. DKC 2 is chock full of animation too, and I really dig how the heroes throw their hands in the air when riding down a large drop of the roller coaster. And of course, everything else the Kongs do looks awesome, with wonderful animations for simple things like walking and running, to more complex motions like picking up a barrel. The transparencies are also utilized to a greater effect, from rolling clouds, the aforementioned water, dripping honey in the beehive levels, more convincing fog, and my absolute favorite, the moonlight poking through the trees in Ghostly Grove. It appears there's a moon in the center of the screen, and the rays shift from right to left as the player moves around. Even better, the rays will disappear and reappear as if a tree is obstructing the light as the player navigates. It looks stunning and is the coolest effect I've seen on the Super Nintendo. Less impressive are the transparent enemies. It's an obvious use for transparencies for sure, but coming from a primarily Sega Genesis childhood, I appreciate seeing this effect on such old hardware. About the only fault I have with the graphics is an increased amount of slowdown. I certainly can't know if the game is hitting a sprite limit on the hardware or if there's some unoptimized code in the game engine, but I notice slowdown far more frequently in DKC 2. Still, overall, the graphics are both technically and artistically more pleasing than the original, which was a beautiful game in its own right. Moving along, let's talk about the audio. As frequently noted, the soundtrack is nothing short of epic. Right from the start, the player is treated with some atmospheric creaking ship sounds before a song fades into existence. Underwater areas sound tense and dark, matching the eerie feeling one might expect in a sunken ship. The lava levels feature a terrific synth tune mixed with subtle bubbling sounds as the lava boils in the background. The mine areas utilize an instrument set that resembles working with metal tools on a railroad or a pickaxe smashing a rock. The unique instrument selection carries over in the swamp level, where part of the music is made up of what appears to be buzzing insect sounds. I'm not sure how to explain the bramble area music, but there is some depth rarely experienced during this generation. There are haunting notes which seem to linger on forever, while some bassy notes add an underlying hint of drama, and higher pitched notes add urgency to these generally challenging levels. It's all very beautiful and is one of my favorite pieces found in the franchise thus far. The coaster levels are all techno, but also feature a few light screams, giving them both an eerie feel, but the screams are what one might expect if watching someone zip along on a roller coaster. The variety and quality never lets up either, with the final castle levels featuring an almost Disney-like quality, sounding like an orchestra. Sound effects are also improved, lacking annoying biting sounds or white noise static. I also really dug the ending sequences for both heroes, with Diddy featuring a little boombox rap and Dixie rocking out with an electric guitar. Needless to say, the sound presentation is as amazing as the visuals, with a more diverse soundtrack featuring catchier melodies and a wider instrument selection, and a more consistent quality with the sound effects. I honestly can't even find a nitpick. It's an audio treat from beginning to end. So, with all of that out of the way, let's get back to my main question. Is Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest superior to the original game? To answer this question, I want to address my main complaints with the first title. Granted, I still find DKC 1 to be a great game. I just wouldn't call it a masterpiece. Enemy behavior was basic, the camera didn't always provide the best view, enemies would surprise the player, especially underwater and on the minecarts. The game had a fetish for bottomless pits, collision detection detection was poor at times, the save system was inconsistent, bosses were lackluster, and the difficulty often relied on trial and error. Despite being released just under a year later, Rare did manage to address most of these concerns. As noted, the bosses are vastly superior and enemy behavior more complex. During the roller coaster sections and underwater, enemies just didn't race onto the screen, causing damage. Enemies feel more thoughtfully placed and their interaction with the environment more thoughtful, almost completely alleviating the trial and error difficulty. While Donkey Kong Country 2 still has a ton of bottomless pits, it's far less prevalent here. There is a ton more vertical gameplay, and falling will surprisingly not always result in death. Instead, the punishment for poor play is to retry a section of the level, which is more preferable in a game which doesn't allow saving between all levels. The collision detection is also improved, and I don't have a single example of jumping on an enemy resulting in taking damage. Now, maybe this is because both Diddy and Dixie are smaller than the Donkey Kong sprite, allowing for a more precise and predictable hitbox, or maybe the collision programming was improved. I can't say for certain, but I never found myself taking surprise damage, and the collision detection remained favorable to the player, allowing one to hit an enemy as long as they are slightly above. However, two items weren't improved at all. The save system is still needlessly complicated. Upon entering a world, a player cannot save the game until finally unlocking Wrinkly Kong, but saving is no longer free, and the player needs to spend banana coins for the privilege of saving. This is free the first time in each world, but then costs a coin every time thereafter. In the Western version, this costs 2 banana coins, but was reduced to 1 in the Japanese release. In either case, while a minor annoyance, racking up a large banana coin count is surprisingly easy, until one shuts off their console. Upon reloading a save, the life counter resets to 5 and the banana coins reset to 0. I've absolutely no idea why this happens, but it sucks to rack up a large life counter only to have it all taken away if one needs to step away from the game. Another high-profile platformer from 1995, Rayman, didn't do this, letting a player retain all of their lives every time they reloaded a save file, so it seems this unnecessary handicap only exists to troll the player. Speaking of difficulty, despite the reduction in trial and error and fewer surprise enemies, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest manages to be even more challenging than the original. More is asked of the player than ever before. Some obstacles are now on a timer or chase the player, forcing the player to make quick decisions and execute flawlessly. But just about every challenge is of the fair variety, so there is a real sense of accomplishment when challenges are overcome, which is a good thing. Though I do find the checkpoint system to be as needlessly restrictive as the save system. You see, I enjoy the sense of accomplishment when overcoming an obstacle, but having to redo a challenge over and over to make it a little farther sucks when a game is 7 to 8 hours long. For whatever reason, each level features just a single checkpoint barrel, which means repeating the same stretches of levels over and over with each death. The achievement of overcoming something difficult is snatched away from the player all too quickly, and I suspect this is the reason Donkey Kong Country games are not held in the same regard as the Sonic and Mario games. Sonic the Hedgehog features loads of checkpoints in every level, ensuring a player won't have to redo too much upon failure. With Donkey Kong Country, moments of the game feel padded out due to ridiculous level lengths and sparse checkpoints. Repeating long sections of Red Hot Ride or Webb Woods starts to become a real grind after the 3rd or 4th death. This isn't a skill problem either. I completed the game 102% twice. Rather, I feel if a game is going to demand such precision and skill from the player, then standard structural elements like checkpoints and saving should be adjusted accordingly. Take the 2010 hit Limbo, for example. This game is brutally difficult. The player needs to solve complex puzzles and perform actions perfectly in order to progress. And like Donkey Kong Country 2, there is an immense feeling of satisfaction when overcoming each and every insane challenge. However, the game automatically saves after each and every obstacle, which doubles as the game's checkpoint. There is no point where the feeling of victory is taken away from the player and they are forced to repeat something. Granted, I can now cruise through DKC2 without much of an issue, but the sense of padding lingers with each death. Speaking of padding, another pace breaker is how slow parts of the game are. This is evident with the aforementioned Red Hot Ride in Webb Woods. First, I must applaud the developers for the increased variety in obstacles and hazards. This hot air balloon ride is really interesting. The player needs to guide the balloon to heat, causing the balloon to rise, and then race to the next one before it drops into the lava. But it goes on forever. Same goes for Webb Woods. The spider is a neat concept. I like how the player can control the web platforms or web projectile with the up and down buttons, giving even greater flexibility. But there is no doubt these sections are slow, and having to redo large chunks of these slow sections because of the lack of checkpoints is a real pace breaker. When people say they don't like the Donkey Kong Country series, I get it. Getting repeatedly kicked when down is not a fun experience. And then there is Squawks the Parrot. Controlling this bird is like swimming, but worse. The learning curve is exceptionally steep. In addition to rapidly pressing the flat button to achieve lift, the up button also needs to be held to increase the speed. Moving downward also feels odd, with two different descent speeds, one achieved while pressing nothing and a second while pressing down. It all feels very busy and more complicated than necessary. Unfortunately, mastering the controls is mandatory because Squawks features the hardest levels found in the game. Bramble Scramble appears first, requiring the player to navigate tight corridors with the complicated flight controls. Avoiding enemies is one thing, but also not being able to touch the ceiling, floor, or walls becomes overwhelming and represents a rather high difficulty spike in the adventure. The boss fight, King Zing Sting, is interesting because it's a fight utilizing new mechanics, but hitting the stinger with the arced egg shot is extremely awkward to perform without taking damage. Parachute Panic actually features a different bird, one lacking flight. Instead, the player needs to slowly guide the heroes down long paths avoiding zingers. The player will be tasked with pressing up to reduce speed and pressing the speed button to zip left and right. The clearances here are insanely tight, and any lapse in concentration is sure to result in damage or death. And of course, there is just one checkpoint. Last but not least is Screeches Sprint. For some unknown reason, the player is forced to race another bird to the finish line. This means an absolute mastery of the flight mechanics is required to beat the opponent, moving as quickly as possible up, down, and across to clear the level. And because it's a race, a first-time player is sure to smack into walls or enemies in their quest for speed, adding a trial and error element sure to frustrate even the most hardened of gamers. It took me well over an hour to get through this the first time, and I absolutely hated it. And if one is going for 102% completion, it gets even worse. Like the first game, DKC2 has bonus barrels, which will send the player to a bonus room to complete a task. This is either finding a creme coin, defeating all enemies, or nabbing a set number of stars. The reward for each of these is a creme coin, of which there are 75. Unlike DKC1, where just getting to a bonus room was enough to complete the game, DKC2 requires each timed bonus room to be completed. The 75 creme coins are then used to unlock 15 hidden levels in the Lost World. Beating these 5 levels will unlock a true final boss and a new ending sequence. These 5 levels are brutal, requiring perfect accuracy while bouncing off tires, a slippery ice world filled with zingers, some of the most insane barrel challenges yet devised, those steerable barrels, and finally, the madness that is Animal Antics. Animal Antics has a squawk segment in a windy area. Yeah, wind. This is actually used a few times, with the wind either being triggered by the player when reaching a trigger point, or a back and forth pattern. It works well enough, changing up the jumping formula, adding some variety. But when wind is mixed with flight, the result is the single most frustrating level found in the game. Anything but the most brief of inputs will send the bird smashing into the brambles, which is incredibly annoying. And of course, there is no checkpoint checkpoint after clearing this obstacle course, so if one dies on the next section of the level, they have to do the Squawks section all over again. There is one final element to completing Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest, the 40 DK coins. Every level has a hidden DK coin, which can be found in a bonus stage, the regular part of the level, or hiding in the minigame at the end of the level. However, to get all 40, the player will also need to find the bonus stage hidden in each lost world, which is how the final 5 are obtained. This will reward the player first place in Cranky's Video Game Heroes and allow one to reach 102% on their save file. But outside of perhaps nostalgia, I'm not sure the pain and persistence needed for these rewards is really worth it. There are a few other things that are sure to kill the player as well. The level boundary isn't handled consistently. Sometimes the player can jump into the abyss. Sometimes there is a barrier causing the character to hit their head and immediately go back down. The camera will also spaz out as it isn't able to pan where the player isn't allowed to go. This happened just once in the first game, which was infrequent enough for me to not even mention it. But when the character is off screen, the camera jerks and there's no way for the player to know where the character is. I also hate how the camera doesn't always pan downwards when hovering with Dixie, which basically amounts to leaps of faith. And of course, there is still no player control to look up and down. On the bright side, holding down actually comes in handy in this game, so the animation frames aren't wasted. My final control quibbles are related to Dixie. She cannot engage her helicopter hair after bouncing off an enemy, nor when jumping off sticky honey. It's an odd restriction, and it took me a while to adjust to a control input not being reflected with an action. I see no real reason for this restriction, but whatever. So, I think I've clearly demonstrated why many may not have the same fondness for Donkey Kong Country 2 as others, and in some respects I can see why people might prefer the original. However, I still find Diddy's Conquest to be better designed overall. It's not just the reduced trial and error, with the one exception, or the reduction in BS enemy placement. DKC2 does a much better job communicating with the player. This is most obvious in the coaster levels. The first coaster level has the player touching switches to open up doors, and also avoiding switches which will close a door, causing damage. Thankfully, memorization is not required to overcome these challenges. Instead, the banana placement communicates to the player what to do. If there's a trail of bananas, the player should follow the trail to hit the switch. If there isn't a trail, the player should avoid the switch. And of course, some banana trails guide the player away from bad switches. There is even a banana to guide the player over a surprise barrel throw, which is pretty awesome. The banana placement is sometimes even more obvious, with arrows alerting the player to secrets, even off-screen secrets, which I really appreciate. I also really dig how this Kremlin randomly shoots out a super slow cannon shot. It's odd, but if the player was paying attention to an earlier clue, they'll find this cannonball will smash through a wall, revealing a bonus. It's clever and thoughtful, and more often than not, Donkey Kong Country 2 is communicating to the player how to proceed through the level with few surprises. Last but not least, outside of Squawks, the quality of the gameplay and level design never dips. Be it swimming with On Guard, slinging webs with Squitter, or bouncing off zingers with Rambi, each and every animal buddy feels like an integral part of the adventure. Stage gimmicks like sticky honey, roller coasters, hot air balloons, wind, barrels, and ghost ropes keep the game feeling fresh from beginning to end. At the end of the day, outside of the camera and flight mechanics, Donkey Kong Country 2 is superior to the original. The controls are as smooth and responsive as ever, and the new moves give the player even more flexibility with overcoming obstacles. The graphics are improved with more color and contrast, and a smoother, less pixelated look overall. The diversity of the set pieces is also amazing, and I really dig the beehive and swamp areas. And most importantly, the game is designed better, with better level layouts, better enemy behavior, and more engaging bosses. While completing the adventure is far more tedious, it's also completely optional. And the main campaign is a far more comprehensive and polished experience. In closing, while DKC1 was a great game in its own right, DKC2 is an improvement. While it did frustrate the hell out of me, most of the challenges of the fair variety, and there is little doubt much more care went into item, enemy, and hazard placement, and to come out just 364 days after the first title is an amazing achievement, almost as amazing as the game itself.